Tuesday on NBC. Jimmy Fallon and Bozoma St. John host the highly anticipated new competition show.
I hired 10 creatives from all walks of life. They will be battling it out to see who can impress the world's biggest brands.
This is a huge opportunity.
This is the battle for the next big idea.
This is not play.
We're spending millions of dollars.
I'm so excited to embark on this adventure with all of you.
May the best idea win!
On Brand with Jimmy Fallon. Series premiere Tuesday on NBC.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Welcome to another beautiful episode of NatureBacked. Today my guest is Matthew Jordan. Matthew, hello, welcome to the show.
Hi, Darmo. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here.
What are you building?
We are building a platform to enable carbon credit developers who work in nature-based solutions to accelerate and develop their projects faster, more effective, and aligned with compliance regulations, and really trying to hit that piece of the market that was missing for so long, which is high integrity credits. So that's really our focus.
And as you speak about the high integrity credits, I think probably many of the listeners are aware that the carbon credit market is a little bit, how would I say, not fully functioning marketplace, where there is a couple of the systems which work in some way or the other, but there is mostly, I think, the voluntary carbon market, which is like the wild west, or I don't know what's the right comparison to it.
I think that's a fair thing to say. I mean, I think it's being quite diplomatic. I think there's some people who would say that the voluntary carbon market is trash, or I've heard red is dead. I've heard that it needs to be eaten it needs to be taken up by the compliance market, which actually comes from the CEO of Vera, one of the biggest verifiers and standards in the world. You know, they have the lion's share of all projects. So I think it's fair to say that it is a struggling or confused or fragmented market with some significant headwinds. And I would say, like, when I first started, so we really launched in early 2024. My co-founder Miguel Correa and I, he's really the data scientist. I'm actually an engineer. I might not ever be able to do, I don't do much technical work now as much as I used to, but so it's kind of funny we're both engineers, but he's like the real engineer because he's an AI data scientist. And like I was an environmental engineer, so I don't do much with soil chemistry these days. So anyways, all that to say, when we got into this market, this was 2024. So this is after the Guardian article. This is after some serious road, speed bumps and obstacles that the voluntary carbon markets were facing. And we still believed in it. And I personally believed in it because I worked for most of my career, a third of my life in central Mozambique. And at the time, I don't know if it's okay to go into like a little backstory. I don't want to take up the time with a 45-minute sales pitch. So at the time, I was working in central Mozambique in conservation, and I was working on communities, and I was doing, on the one hand, project implementation, where I was working with communities and working in agroforestry. My claim to fame from that project was I was the first ever to export specialty coffee from Mozambique. So if you're a big coffee fan, then it was like, anyways, that was nice. Now there's multiple brands, but at the time that was the first one. Anyways, so what I saw was we needed some way to really have financing for these projects, for conservation, for the community. We're really working on poverty, working on how to kind of create some kind of relationship with forest-age communities so that the deforestation could go down, but the livelihoods could go up. magic, these magic forces could somehow align, and then we could get some really great climate resilience and etc. And at the time, I was raising philanthropic money, and we were doing very good. I was very successful at raising philanthropic money and worked with some amazing family offices and bilateral donors and major organizations. And yet there was this obvious limitation to what philanthropy could do. It came with a lot of strings attached. It didn't tie anyone to long-term markets. The skills building wasn't connected really to economic output. So there was all these kind of challenges, and stickiness. And so we were looking for a way to create real capital, real value for communities that were tied more closely to, let's say, sustainable financing mechanisms. And we looked at payment for ecosystem services, PES. Looked at a bunch of stuff at the time. And one of the big things we looked at were carbon credits, nature-based solutions for carbon credits. And that was really I came at carbon credits really from a conservation and livelihoods perspective, and really as a sustainable financing mechanism. And when I got in the door, I was like, this checks many of the boxes that I've been trying to check. And again, we started companies to try to create for-profit private sector businesses that sort of help communities and did conservation. And you find that it's tough to build that company and be profitable. It ends up working a bit like philanthropy in some ways, although it does add some serious value. So we thought this was a bit of a more pure play on connecting remote communities to this kind of nature market. And that was almost 5 years ago, I think now. So that was kind of let's say, my origin story.
That's the kind of, I don't know, background story, but what was the flip? When did you guys meet, or how did you start the company?
So I worked there for 10 years in Mozambique, and really my existence consisted of a 400,000 hectare area, conservation area. Well, let's say it's 1 million hectares with all the communities and all the buffer zone, etc. That was my universe for a long time. And after 10 years there, I decided, what is the next 10 years of my life going to be about? What am I going to do for this next 10 years of my life? And I really got interested in sort of expanding and using what I learned to do something, out there in the world. And I really, at the time I had, I'm an engineer, but I had sort of gotten exposure to entrepreneurship. And I think you speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, right? So I don't know what happened to me. I don't know if it happens to other entrepreneurs, but essentially, can you hear me? Okay. So I don't know if it happens to other entrepreneurs, but when I found out about entrepreneurship as like a livelihood, as my own livelihood, I got really excited. It was kind of this thing that I had been pretending to be an engineer my whole life, but really I was just kind of a salesman or an entrepreneur. Inside I had this guy I didn't know. I never let him out. I just kind of buried him with calculators and books and stuff. And then when I realized that could be a job, I just was like, I really wanted to. So that was like, I knew the next 10 years of my life I was going to do entrepreneurship, and I knew I wanted to continue my work in nature. I'd always done environmental work, always done development, and then for about 5 years then did more nature-based solutions and carbon. And I started to meet with a friend of mine, a close friend. He was working for a very large, one of the big 4 consulting companies at the time, and he was just crushing it with more or less, let's say, AI and machine learning solutions for major corporations. And he was just doing amazing work. And when we were talking, he kept, this thing I hear a lot from people in the corporate world is they're like 1 or 2 steps too far away from nature or impact, or, they're like, I want to get back there. They feel some draw. I was on the opposite side because I had been living in the bush for 10 years. So I was like, I want to go 1 step towards you, can we meet in the middle? And so we had a bunch of whiteboard sessions, and we just basically looked at some of the major problems and the major opportunities. We looked at, there's 1 gigaton, or there's like 100 gigatons of stored carbon in tropical peatlands. So we looked at that. I talked to some scientists, looked at the technology at the time with these flux towers, really great work. And there's some great companies now working on that, actually. We looked at some stuff with blue carbon, and we looked at some other stuff. And then we looked at sort of bringing over, he had done some really amazing, sort of, let's say, AI modeling for, to keep it not too like get off the rails here with some of the technical side, and he had sort of brought in that AI modeling to some tree growth project for a very large company. And the idea was like, well, can we build off of that concept of being able to do really effective AI modeling for carbon credits, which at the time, now it's actually ubiquitous. So it's everywhere you look. All of our peers in this space have AI modeling and machine learning, either through canopy height models or whatnot. But it's now quite ubiquitous. At the time, it was like, can we jump in and do it? And we were starting to do it. So we jumped in. We these folks in Angola who were asking to do some analysis of their land. They wanted rapid screening. They wanted all these things. So we just started building tools based off of sort of these demands. And that really started this concept, which is really the foundation of everything we do, which is, we call it NatureOS, or Nature's Operating System. And that's really that's what we have been, let's say that's the big machine we're building. And then we're kind of constructing pieces of that big machine. And that machine is kind of driving us forward. It's sort of the plane we're building, and we're on the plane actually. So sort of building it as you're flying it, which is always a fun thing.
A classical startup story, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some communities who that NatureOS sounds way too wacky. Some different religious parts of the world or something like that. But in reality, it makes all the sense in the world, of course. My question, in this series, we've been talking a lot with the different companies working on a mission how to preserve nature or, create some kind of sustainable value there. The question or the challenge from the very many different directions is that, where's the money? Everybody wants to do something good, but where actually some finance coming in that, the entrepreneur gets paid, or, it's nice to build things based on investors' capital, but where does the money come from? How are those, nature-based solutions finance? Why is that, financial value created? And we do see from different directions, especially this year, I've noticed that many central banks have started to price in the climate as, part of their models and so on. So it kind of starts drip by drip to happen. But what's your take on this?
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
When your investors, customers, and workers demand more from your business, make it happen with SAP. The AI-powered capabilities of SAP can help you streamline costs, connect with new suppliers, and manage payroll, even when your business is being pulled in different directions. To deliver a quality product at a fair price while paying your people what they're worth too, so your business can stay unfazed. Learn more at sap.com/uncertainty.
Yeah, I think, Tamo, I think that's a really, again, a very good read on that. And again, very diplomatic. I would say some people would be like, there ain't no money, ain't nobody care about nature. I've been in those rooms also, those like back rooms, and I think that's very true. And what we have found is that their nature in most respects is an externality. It's an externality to the economy in general. It's somehow priced in when you buy water, maybe. Somehow it's priced in when you think about anything extracted from nature in terms of minerals or in terms of fossil fuels. It's priced in there somehow. those are also natural products in a way. It's priced in a few different ways and is fundamentally not priced in terms of the services provided by nature. It's just, and climate is not priced in anywhere. Climate is wildly unpriced into the thing. And I would say economics and societies, and I am not a social anthropologist or an economist by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I'm functionally literate, so like I can read, but like again, I'm not really part of that cohort of people who really understand these things in depth. What I do know is that throughout human history, I would say that things have become priced in that were never priced in. And that has been part of the evolution of economies. I mean, I now live in Europe. I'm American, but I live in Europe now. And I think about it a lot because here there were, I'm from a country with a lot of, there's a lot to say about my country and my history, but whatever. I'm from America. I love America. But now I live in Europe for most of my life, most of my time. And the Europeans had king and queens. They had kings and queens. And I don't know really how they priced in things that, like there were serfs and stuff. My partner's family were like peasants. You know what I mean? They worked basically and gave most everything they did. I'm not pretending to really understand the economics of, let's say, medieval Europe, but I do know that there was major parts of, let's say, the social status and social structure that fundamentally were not priced into economics of any kind. And I think that's not a very good answer, but I think it's, in my mind, I like to think about the fact that nature will have to be priced in. And as you said, it's sort of trickling into the zeitgeist and the consciousness of every human on Earth. It's kind of coming in, but it's coming in and trying to fight for space in the, let's say, social consciousness against big issues like social issues and cultural issues. And then it's also fighting against economic issues, both as a developing, and if you've read Bill Gates' book about, climate change, stopping climate change, I like the first half. The second half I thought was like not very interesting. I don't know if he watches your podcast, but I hope he doesn't get me, cancel my Windows subscription or something. But it's like
people don't receive from that. There's no problem with that.
But yeah, so that's to say that where I've spent my whole career working in developing countries, in basically in Mozambique and now in other parts of Africa and India and a few other places, where the economic growth has to happen to really push through some major human health issues and human kind of basic standards of living issues need to come up and all those things. So that's one side that climate change is kind of, that climate in general is trying to be priced in when the world's major populations are trying to grow, right? So I think that's a major tension point. And then on the other side, you have, I think there's 2,700 billionaires on planet Earth who own some ridiculous proportion of all human wealth, whatever the trillions are tied up with those 2,000 human beings. You can fit them, on a cruise ship, and they own almost all the wealth in the world. But anyways, they're fighting it from a very different angle, right? Because they have a vested interest to kind of hedge against climate disaster, which would be economically very bad, and also their own ROI. And so, if you're running a big company, you're not going to be able to really, if you try to bake in climate as, let's say Microsoft is trying to do, or some other companies are trying to do, they always come up short, essentially, because the cost of nature is very high and it's completely, no one's paying for it anywhere. Where there are some big piles of money are things like GCF, GEF, for better or for worse, the Green Climate Fund. Some of these large sort of pots of money get pooled around for adaptation and resilience. In the private sector, we have, as a carbon who's our customer is the carbon credit developer. That's really our target. Those are the people we work with. We work with very unsophisticated and very sophisticated and very nascent and quite mature developers. So quite a spectrum. And what are they saying about where's the money? Essentially, there's a major gap that we're seeing, which is in that, and there's a great group, if you've heard, I think they're called Climate Continuum. might be carbon continuum, but I think they might be called climate continuum. Capital continuum. Anyways, they're an amazing group. They have this really amazing chart that shows, kind of this fun money coming in, project development versus risk, and then sort of the investors' view on it. And in those early days, I call them dreamers. I don't know what else to call them. These guys, they reach out to me all the time. I always take their calls. They have legit projects. They're working with communities, or they're like this one lady I know. It's her hometown, which is this mangrove town in sub-Saharan Africa in a country, and she's like, I want to save these mangroves. Like, what do I do? And she has this dream. How does that lady get over the line to have? Because what is a carbon project? Essentially, it's a green infrastructure project. I mean, if you go build a house, you might dream of building a house, which a lot of people dream about building a house. And you might go talk to people like, hey, you might go talk to an architect like, hey, I really want to build a house, or a builder and be like, hey, I really want to build a house. That guy's going to look at you and be like, laugh in your face. He's not going to be like, oh, let me help you out to build your house. Like, he's going to be like, show me the money. And you might be able to go to the bank, right? And so there's a world where you could potentially go find this money, someone could give it to you. But when you look at the risk, unproven track record, etc., these are the risks that all entrepreneurs, or let's say early stage developers of any kind, face. And in this untested, uncharted market of carbon credits, where there's significant policy headwinds from every side, it's completely fragmented, where you have big guys. These guys, you have commodities traders who are the biggest companies in the world putting their finger on the scale somewhere. You have petroleum companies coming in, and then you have all the conservation people trying to do good in the world, quote unquote. And so that's a complex market. It's not like going to build a house or building a bridge or something like that, but yet it is an infrastructure project, or a green infrastructure project in its core. So I don't know. That's a kind of a long-winded answer, but where's the money? Big thing is there's a big gap right at the beginning, huge. And if you can, and most of the concessional finance that used to maybe used to be able to take a bite out of this concessional finance, a lot of it is absent, missing, dried up. Politics and cultures have changed. So you got to kind of be really, you got to either find the right partner, or you got to be full of grit and determination and just, stumble your way through. And, but once you get to a certain point of having a bit of a pilot, a little bit of meat behind your proposal, you have your carbon credits validate, you have some estimations, you have a good business model, and you can bring all that, which is what you'd have to bring if you were trying to get a loan from a bank. And you'd have to probably bring collateral. So these dreamers, they're trying to do, let's say, the Earth's work, trying to really bring the Earth and bring climate, which is what we all want. But they still have to professionalize in a significant way to close that gap. And that is not easy in the jurisdictions where I work. I mean, it's a mountain.
And probably in some of the jurisdictions, kind of problems start from the scratch, starting from the ability to have a definite answer on the question of who actually owns this land, or some kind of
That's a major issue.
Also on this show where people, I think we had one developer from Uganda on the show, who said that one of the main challenges they're facing is that to have the written proof of landowner who can create additional value, because their registries are maybe non-existent or on paper somewhere in the archives or something like that. So there's a lot of things you don't really think about when you live in the digital society.
Yeah. Well, even here, it's not all, even in the U.S., for example, the southern U.S., parts of, my mom lives in Alaska. I mean, these places they're not as straightforward as they might seem at first glance. The systems and structures, I don't know about. Maybe Switzerland, everything works, everything runs on time. I don't know. But like everywhere I've ever lived, there's always sort of cracks in the system and gaps and unknowns, and not everything has sort of been digitized fully. And one thing we're doing, You mentioned Uganda. We haven't quite had a project in Uganda, but so far we've managed to work with carbon developers and landowners in Ghana, DRC, Republic of Congo, Mozambique, Zambia, and Angola, and possibly coming up some really interesting projects in Brazil and maybe one in Portugal, which would be very interesting. And across the board, it's like every project is its own unique challenge, and each jurisdiction is its own challenge. And I think one thing we're doing to add value is really basically at this moment, a lot of it is the remote sensing. We do a lot of work with groups to help them just basically carry the project through. So a lot of that is just advising, strategic development, making sure there's compliance, writing project design documents. And then that's based on this layer of data insights from machine learning. And we call it an AI foundry in a way, where you have something like the remote sensing over here, and then we're able to plug in a lot of really interesting things like some LiDAR data to create these really amazing canopy height models. Or we're taking deforestation risk analysis from let's say the land cover for Ghana or something, really specific data sets for specific countries, and producing these really interesting data insights that are basically driving decision making and from the carbon developers themselves. It's all something that I wanted when I was sitting in the bush and I was like trying to contact a carbon developer, and I was like, just give me these things. And they struggled because it wasn't their business model. But that's our business model. We build those things, we give them to you, and we really help you kind of get through to the validation or to feasibility, or in some cases, and this is kind of awkward, you got to say, you don't got a project. You just paid me. You just paid us for the service. We did analysis for you, and you don't have a project. And that's the reality. Like, you can't build a house everywhere. You can't do a carbon project everywhere. It's just not suitable. So
At Thales, we know cybersecurity can be tough and you can't protect everything, but with Thales, you can secure what matters most. With Thales industry-leading platforms, you can protect critical applications, data, and identities anywhere and at scale with the highest ROI. That's why the most trusted brands and largest banks, retailers, and healthcare companies in the world rely on Thales to protect what matters most: applications, data, and identities. That's Thales, Thales. Learn more at thalesgroup.com/cyber.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Exactly. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the details about why you're going to the NatureOS. But first, the maybe one wider question where we could probably talk for a few hours. What's your take on the biodiversity trend? Do you see them as kind of expanding the carbon credit space? Are they adding value, or are they actually so vague that they might actually make it more complicated, or maybe add risk, actually?
That's a really good question. There's an amazing company out there, Savimbo. I can't believe if they're like Colombian based, but they work in the rest of Amazon. I can't remember exactly where they're based. I think it's Colombia, but anyways, it's an amazing group of human beings who have a pitch perfect read on the methodologies required and the kind of market demand that is nascent, maybe growing. So they just recently sold their first credit. Can't remember the exchange off the top of my head, but it just happened. So, the first biodiversity credit has been sold on the market, from this standard. And that's a great sign. I think essentially that is trying to attack a question here. Carbon credits, by definition, only come to more or less distressed, degraded, or areas that are under threat in some fashion or another. You can sort of think about it in some other ways, but it's more or less that. Like, the land is degraded or whatever, and you're basically trying to put carbon in or keep carbon there that's under threat, right? And that's, more or less the soil or the trees, and the value of the biodiversity, it can be tagged on, but it's only sort of a tag on, right? It's only sort of on the end of it. So with biodiversity credits, you can actually have a fully intact, not under threat area that is totally devoid of animals, and it needs animals, like Yellowstone forever didn't have, wolves, and because there was no wolves, there was this trophic cascade and there was no trees. All the trees were dying because there was no wolves, and they suddenly introduced wolves and it fixes the whole ecosystem or whatever. And so, again, I'm not an ecologist, so the things I'm saying, I have read, I've watched on YouTube. Like, I don't really know these things very well in the science of them, but I guess in a short answer, I think biodiversity credits very much have a place. And I've been talking to folks who are looking at water credits or nature credits in general. And one of the major successes, at least in terms of branding and in terms of growth, is the Equitable Earth, formerly the Ecosystem Restoration Standard, from a French group out of Paris. They're really amazing company. Started, I remember speaking to them early on, and they all seemed like they were in their 20s. I mean, I thought, I was like, man, these guys don't have a shot. They don't know what they're doing. And when I got into their work, and because I worked with them for a little bit, and then I saw their growth, and I saw that they hired, I remember our first conversation with their CEO, I was like, you got to get some gray-haired guys in there who really know the science and know the game. And he was like, yeah, I'm on it. And he hired some of the best and brightest human beings on the planet, to work with him. And they've built a standard, which, again, I don't know I know that it doesn't have a major, let's say, market share compared to something like Vera, which is the dominant market, standard provider. And yet they really scratch this itch that everyone feels, which is like, we're talking about restoration here. We're not only talking about carbon. And I think that's an interesting perspective, is that when these standards start to think more holistically, it does make things more complex. The one thing I will say also is that what happens when our technology becomes more advanced? Then all of a sudden, some of the machine learning analysis we do, we can measure almost anything. There's some assumptions there, but those are validated through LiDAR, or those are validated through some direct measurement. And all of a sudden you're able to forecast your tree growth with an insane amount of accuracy. So what happens when you start to, take that to the limit and say that, okay, well, we're going to be able to measure and monitor everything in nature with a high degree of certainty? As soon as you can measure it, I mean, you can sell it. You can monetize it in a way, because it becomes one of the most, let's say, valuable assets on the planet is nature. Everything depends on it. Like, so yeah. So I'm really curious to watch how it goes. We're very interested. We can work with partners on the remote sensing or those things. We've talked to some of these groups like Savimbu, and Plan Vivo has an amazing head of their biodiversity standard. I've read through all those documents. It's like these guys, they're so smart that they really know that the market is going to call foul. They know that the market, once it gets out there, is going to be like, I don't believe you, prove it. And they are coming with these not bulletproof, but really clever designs that I think are going to go really far, in general.
Let's hope so. What about your NatureOS project? I mean, what are the next highlights or milestones you're looking to reach?
Yeah, so NatureOS, we first started with a few set of tools. Our why is to create enabling conditions for nature-based solutions projects to thrive. That's what I did for most of my career, is I was building those, and now I really want to provide some enabling support for those project enabling tools. And we've created a bunch of amazing tools. So we've created ARR suitability scanning. We've created, RED plus deforestation scanning aligned with these major methodologies, and all these really amazing tool sets that we're using with clients. Now we're in a point to say, okay, what is the next thing we build on to NatureOS? Because the market has significantly changed, and our tool pipeline that we've built We have more that we can build, and yet when you look around, things have changed slightly. I would say, maybe I'm saying the quiet part out loud here to my other people who work in this space, and what I've seen, in all these conversations is that on the developer side, they either want to have this in-house, they want to own the Earth observation and remote sensing processes, and they want to own their workflow there, or the registries are coming for the technical service work, and the registries are going to eat that up like Vera's kind of trying to own all the data for standardization for all very good reasons. And so it does kind of create a squeeze happening for these let's say technical tools providing. So then what does NatureOS really represent? Well, it's the enabling conditions. And so what we're looking for now, and I reached out to 300 people last month, and I had like dozens of calls with developers and people on the ground and people in, seeing offices or whatever. And, there's a question of like, what is the next thing or the next set of things that these projects really need to be enabled? And the easy answer maybe is money. If I just came with a big blank check, I could probably fix everybody's problem, but that's a little too, I think it's a little too, not cynical, but it's a little too simplified. I think you could come with a blank check and you'd find a lot of trash projects, and you wouldn't have any way to tell what's what, in the market. You'd be stuck in there. So we're really looking at that now, and we have some really interesting pain points that we've identified. One is ground truth data. How do you get ground truth data? You were just talking about Uganda and not having land tenure. Part of that is like having an ability to find somebody you trust to find the data. Part of that is where we work trying to measure trees in remote areas. And these, I was working with some group, and they were telling me a quote for some work they were doing in the country, and they were saying, we got to send our expert. It's going to cost us, $15,000 to send him down there for this job. And I remember, because I used to live there, and I would pay these guys so much money to come down, and they would sit around and walk around for a couple of days. And how impressed, like, how much did you really do here? So I'm not throwing any shade on anybody if that's your livelihood. And that's all to say that that's a major pain point people are pointing to. They're also pointing towards that concessional financing. Can we close that gap between the dreamer and the person who has something to show the bank? Like, can we just shorten that because it will save everybody energy and it'll get a lot more projects going? So we're doing that. We're working with a lot of projects to kind of compress that, make it faster while keeping the high integrity standards. And then I think the third one is, my co-founder he works with agentic AI and generative AI as that's where he feels the most comfortable. So we've seen a lot of our peers in the space create some chatbots around getting information about Carbon Developer, and we like that. We have one, we call it Copa, which means canopy in Portuguese. And he's really nice, and he gives you really good information, and you can actually find lots of great helpful data from him. And, you can get those reports and all these really good things about whatever jurisdiction you're working in. That feels like last year, And so we're really testing the limits of how far can we push this agent, and what can they do, again, to really enable those nature-based solutions and projects. So that's where we are now. We have really great clients. We're doing a big push right now for just providing some information on Miamba woodlands, which is a part of this woodland that basically stretches from Mozambique to Angola, covers 7 countries. It's very heterogeneous landscape. It's very complex. It doesn't get enough attention. So we're giving it some love next couple of weeks, just sharing data sets, sharing information. And yeah, we're always looking for partners, looking for new projects. And so that's more or less where we are.
So basically, you're hopeful.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I struggle to understand if this is because I'm American, but I'm like a pure optimist. I've nothing has ever been easy. I lived when I was in Mozambique. It's like we had wars and cyclones, and everything failed, and it was so impossible. And it just I never turned cynical, and I don't know why. I just, it might be because of like my diet as a kid or something. Like something about me, it's hard for me to go the cynical route. But I don't know. And you know who said, okay, let me say it. let me say something here. Recently, David Attenborough was interviewed. I mean, the guy's like 100 or something, and he was recently interviewed, and the interviewer was like, "How could, after everything you've seen, right? He's basically seen every ecosystem he's ever set foot on be completely destroyed, more or less, right?" And they were like, "After everything you've seen, how could you maintain your sense of hope?" And I mean, that's a real question for a guy who's a centenarian, right? And he said, he's like, "How could I not?" He has grandkids and great grandkids, and he's like, "How could I not have hope for their future?" And I don't know. I mean, I think about him. You know, he's a hero of mine, and that guy never lost hope for 1 second. And the last thing I'll say is, I worked with a guy. Actually, I'm so glad I'm saying. I worked with a guy named Dr. Mark Stallmans, who in some circles was a very well-known ecologist, and he just passed away last Saturday. And he was young. I mean, he was a young man, not young, but he wasn't hundreds. You know, it was like. Anyways, he passed away, and I worked with him for years. And everything I know about Miamba woodlands and nature and all these things and ecology, anything that I've never learned, is I learned through his mentorship for years of working together. And he just passed away, and yet the outpouring of kind of, you know, just praising his dedication to conservation. The guy lived his whole life in conservation and lived and breathed it. Took his last breath in a national park working on conservation. You know, it's like there's human beings like that out there, and they're everywhere. You go to all these different places. There are people that are just dedicated, and I don't think there's anything more potent than the human potential and human capacity. Maybe AI capacity. You know, silicon might beat us one day, but right now it ain't beating us. You know, so I still am a big believer in the human capacity for, you know, really making change happen.
I think on compassion they will not beat us, probably ever. On many other things, they probably beat us already today. I think that's a very good point to wrap up this discussion. Thank you, Matthew, for joining.
Thanks, Tamil. Thank you so much for the time.
The Hilton sale is on. For 10 days only, you can save up to 20% on stays this fall and beyond. Don't wait. The sale ends September 29th. Book your stay and save at Hilton.com. Terms apply. Hilton, for the stay.
If you like the show, subscribe and leave a good rating on the podcast platform of your choice. It would mean a world to us.